The stench hits first decay rust, and the copper temps of old blood mixing with standing water and human waste. Then comes the rattling of chains, the cold bite of metal against skin, and the horrifying realization that you cannot move. Your heart hammers against your ribs like a prisoner beating against cell bars. Panic floods your nervous system as your eyes adjust to the dim, sickly light illuminating a nightmare made flesh. A dilapidated bathroom that looks like it was torn from the bowels of an abandoned asylum. And there, between you and another terrified soul, lies a corpse in a pool of blackened blood. This is where James Wan's 2004 masterwork Saw drags us, kicking and screaming into the darkest corners of human psychology. This is no ordinary horror film. This is a philosophical treatise written in blood and bone, a meditation on mortality disguised as a torture chamber, and the birth of one of cinema's most terrifyingly complex antagonists, John Kramer, the man the world would come to know as Jigsaw. But to call him simply a villain would be to fundamentally misunderstand the horror he represents. Jigsaw is something far more disturbing. Prophet of pain, a sadistic savior, a man who believes that suffering is the only true path to enlightenment. His games aren't the random violence of a Jason Voorhees or the psychosexual rage of a Freddy Krueger. They are carefully orchestrated trials designed to strip away everything comfortable, everything safe, everything human, leaving only the raw, primal will to survive. The birth of a monster, terminal diagnosis, terminal philosophy. To understand the horror of Jigsaw, we must first understand John Kramer, the man behind the mask. Picture this: you're a successful civil engineer, a man who builds things, who creates order from chaos. You have a life, plans, a future stretching before you like an open road. Then, in one sterile doctor's office, that future collapses into a single, suffocating present. Cancer, terminal, inoperable. You have months, maybe a year if you're lucky. For most people, this would be the end of the story. But for John Kramer, it was the beginning of something far darker. Faced with his own mortality, he didn't find peace or acceptance. Instead, he found Raja burning, all-consuming fury at a world full of people who took their lives for granted, who wasted the precious gift of existence on drugs, lies, and petty He survived a suicide attempt, his car crash leaving him impaled but alive, and in that moment of suspended death, he claims to have found clarity. The horror here isn't supernatural, it's deeply, disturbingly human. Kramer's transformation into Jigsaw represents the terrifying possibility that extreme suffering can warp even the most rational mind into something monstrous. He didn't become a killer out of sadism or psychopathy. He became a killer because he genuinely believed he was helping people, teaching them the value of life through the crucible of agony. This delusion, this absolutely sincere belief in his own righteousness, makes him infinitely more terrifying than any mindless slasher. The theology of torment, Jigsaw's twisted gospel, I want to play a game. 5 words that have become synonymous with dread. But these aren't games in any conventional sense. They are trials, tests of character, moral examinations conducted with bone saws and razor wire. Jigsaw's philosophy operates on a simple, horrifying premise. People who waste their lives don't deserve to keep them unless they can prove otherwise through extreme suffering. This is the dark heart of Saw's horror, the idea that pain has pedagogical value, that trauma can be therapeutic, that the only way to appreciate life is to nearly lose it in the most brutal way imaginable. Jigsaw sees himself as a teacher, each trap a lesson plan designed for a specific student's particular failing. He is the sadist as educator, the torturer as life coach, the serial killer as self-help guru. The perversion of these normally benign roles into instruments of terror creates a cognitive dissonance that unsettles us on a fundamental level. Consider his victims. They aren't innocents plucked randomly from the world. Each has been carefully selected, studied, stalked. Each represents a specific form of moral failure in Jigsaw's eyes. Amanda Young, the heroin addict, embodies wasted potential. Her drug use is, to Jigsaw, a form of slow suicide, a rejection of life's possibilities. Her trap, the infamous reverse bear trap, is engineered to reflect this. The device is clamped to her head, its spring-loaded jaws ready to tear her skull apart in 60 seconds unless she can retrieve the key. But the key isn't hidden in some locked box. It's buried in the stomach of a man who is still alive, still breathing, though heavily sedated. To live, Amanda must quite literally dig through another human being's intestines, must overcome every civilized instinct, must become an animal fighting for survival. The true horror of Amanda's trap isn't the blood, or the gore, it's the transformation it forces. When she emerges, covered in viscera and trauma, she isn't broken. She's reborn. In the most disturbing twist of Saw's narrative, Amanda becomes Jigsaw's most devoted follower, praising him as the man who saved her life. This Stockholm Syndrome on a cosmic scale reveals the most terrifying aspect of Jigsaw's philosophy. Sometimes it works. Sometimes the victim drinks the Kool-Aid, embraces the pain, and emerges believing their torture was justified, even necessary. The surgeon's dilemma. Dr. Lawrence Gordon's descent. If Amanda represents addiction's slow suicide, then Dr. Lawrence Gordon embodies a different kind of death, the emotional death of a man who has everything but appreciates nothing. A successful oncologist, the irony isn't lost. Gordon has allowed his marriage to decay, his relationship with his daughter to wither. He's having an affair, lying to his family, going through the motions of a life he no longer truly lives. Jigsaw's trap, for Gordon, is a masterpiece of poetic justice. Chained in that fetid bathroom alongside Adam, a photographer, Gordon himself, hired to surveil his wife. Gordon is given an impossible deadline. Kill Adam by 6 o'clock, or his wife and daughter die. The weapon, a hacksaw. But not for Adam's chains, those are too strong. The saw is for Gordon's foot. This is horror as metaphor made brutally literal. Gordon must physically sever a part of himself to save his family, just as he has emotionally severed himself from them through his selfishness and infidelity. The trap transforms abstract emotional distance into concrete physical mutilation. Every stroke of that saw through bone and sinew is a lesson in the sacrifices he should have been making all along. The screams, the blood, the unimaginable agony, these are merely the external manifestations of consequences he's been avoiding for years. The genius of this trap lies in its forced introspection. As Gordon saws through his own ankle, every nerve screaming in protest, he cannot help but reflect on the choices that led him here. The pain becomes a form of clarity, burning away all the comfortable lies and rationalizations. In Jigsaw's theology, this moment of extreme physical trauma is also a moment of spiritual awakening, a baptism by blood and bone, the architecture of anguish. Traps as dark poetry. Every trap in Jigsaw's arsenal is a carefully crafted work of perverse artistry, a dark meditation on the specific sin it's designed to punish. These aren't random torture devices. their moral arguments made manifest in steel and springs, each one a sermon delivered through suffering. Paul's razor-wire maze epitomizes this principle. Paul, a man who attempted suicide and then exploited his fake injuries for attention and sympathy, is placed naked in a cage filled with coiled razor wire. The exit is visible, freedom tantalizingly close, but to reach it he must crawl through the wire, allowing it to slice into every inch of his body. The trap's message is brutally clear. You wanted attention for fake pain, so now experience real pain and see if you still crave that attention. Every cut, every embedded barb, is a reminder that real suffering is nothing like the theatrical suffering he performed for others. Mark's trap operates on similar principles, but adds layers of cruel irony. Mark pretended to be sick to exploit sick leave from work, essentially stealing time and money. His punishment: poison pumped directly into his veins, genuine sickness for the fake sickness he claimed. The antidote sits in a safe, the combination scrawled across the walls of a room coated in flammable gel. Mark has only a single candle to see buoyant. That candle, if it touches the wrong surface, will turn the entire room into an inferno. He must risk burning alive to cure his poisoning, must choose between one form of death and another, all while the precious seconds tick away. The irony is suffocating. To survive fake sickness, he must navigate the genuine possibility of two horrific deaths. These traps reveal Jigsaw's engineering brilliance, but also something darker: his psychological sophistication. Each device is calibrated not just to cause pain, but to cause the right pain, the pain that mirrors and punishes the specific transgression. They are physical manifestations of guilt, mechanisms of forced atonement, confessionals that accept only blood as penance. The hunt, detective taps obsession, while victims suffer in Jigsaw's traps. The film brilliantly introduces a parallel narrative: the investigation. Detectives David Tapp and Stephen Singh hunt for the killer, following breadcrumbs through a labyrinth of clues that seem designed to lead them forward while keeping them perpetually one step behind. This narrative structure does something crucial. It makes us complicit in the hunt, transforms us from passive viewers into active participants, trying to solve the puzzle before the characters on screen. Detective Tapp's descent into obsession mirrors the transformation of Jigsaw's victims. Initially a dedicated cop following leads, Tapp becomes consumed by the case, unable to let go even after his partner is killed in a confrontation at Jigsaw's lair. The hunt damages him psychologically, destroys his career, turns him into a haunted man stalking suspects and reliving crime scenes. In a sense, Tapp becomes another kind of Jigsaw, victim not physically trapped in a device, but psychologically imprisoned by the case, unable to escape its gravitational pull. This parallel suggests that Jigsaw's games extend beyond his direct victims. Everyone who touches his work becomes infected, contaminated by proximity to his philosophy. The horror spreads like a virus, a mimetic plague that transforms investigators into obsessives, victims into disciples. Nobody escapes unchanged. The moral abyss: are they victims or architects of their own demise? Live or die, make your choice. This simple directive encapsulates the most disturbing element of Jigsaw's philosophy: the illusion of agency. Technically, Jigsaw never directly kills anyone. He creates scenarios, provides tools, establishes rules. The actual death, should it occur, results from the victim's failure to act, to endure, to sacrifice enough. In Jigsaw's twisted logic, this absolves him of responsibility. He's merely a facilitator, an architect of possibility. The victim's death is their own choice, their own failure. This creates a deeply uncomfortable moral ambiguity. Are these people victims of a serial killer, or are they being given a legitimate chance at redemption? Obviously, any rational, ethical framework condemns Jigsaw's actions as murder, forcing someone into a life or death situation, where escape requires self-mutilation, is not giving them a choice in any meaningful sense. But the film deliberately presents this ambiguity, forcing us to grapple with the question. The horror here is philosophical. We're watching people tortured and potentially killed, and yet the film constantly whispers, but they could escape. They could survive if they truly wanted to. They have agency. It's gaslighting on a narrative level, making us question whether we should feel sympathy for victims who fail their tests. This moral confusion is deeply unsettling, far more so than simple violence. It makes us interrogate our own values, our own assumptions about justice, redemption, and the value of human life. The narrative labyrinth, non-linear storytelling as psychological torture stores, structure mirrors the experience of being in one of Jigsaw's traps. The timeline fractures, scenes presented out of chronological order, information revealed piecemeal and deliberately obscured. We see the aftermath of traps before understanding their setup. We meet characters mid-game without knowing how they arrived. Flashbacks intersect with present action, creating a disorienting collage of suffering that keeps us constantly off balance. This isn't just stylistic flourish, it's essential to the film's horror. The confusion, the sense of missing crucial information, the feeling that understanding hovers just out of reach until the last possible moment, these sensations replicate the psychological state of Jigsaw's victims. We, the audience, are placed in our own trap, one made of narrative fragments and delayed revelation. Our trap doesn't threaten our bodies, but it thoroughly disorients our minds, keeping us vulnerable and confused. This structure also allows the film to build toward its devastating conclusion, holding back the single piece of information that recontextualizes everything we've seen. The revelation, game over, and then it happens. The twist that launched a franchise and redefined horror cinema for a generation. Throughout the film, a corpse has been lying in the center of the bathroom. Apparently, a suicide, a man who shot himself rather than participate in Jigsaw's game. The body is background, set dressing, ignored by both characters and audience as we focus on the living victims and their desperate struggle. Then, in the film's final moments, after Gordon has sawed off his foot and crawled away, after Adam has been left alone and screaming in the darkness, the corpse moves. It's not a corpse at all. It's John Kramer, Jigsaw himself, lying perfectly still for hours, watching, listening, judging, as he slowly rises to his feet and the haunting melody of Hello Zepp swells. The full scope of his control becomes horrifyingly clear. This revelation is more than just a plot twist, it's a psychological violation. We, along with the characters, have been watched the entire time. Jigsaw wasn't just a voice on a tape recorder, a distant presence manipulating events. He was there, in the room, a silent witness to every moment of terror and desperation. The intimacy of this surveillance is deeply violating. He watched Gordon saw off his own foot. He watched Adam's panic and confusion. He was close enough to touch them the entire time. The implications cascade outward, forcing a complete reevaluation of every scene. That's not just a body in the room, that's the puppet master himself, the director present for the entire performance. Every line of dialogue, every decision, every moment of hope or despair played out under his watchful gaze. The control he exercised was absolute, his planning flawless, his patience inhuman. His final words, "Game over," aren't just a declaration of victory. They're the closing of a casket, the sealing of a tomb. As he shuts off the lights and leaves Adam screaming in the darkness, he's not just physically trapping him, he's psychologically annihilating him, ensuring that even if Adam somehow escapes, he'll never truly be free of this moment. The game may be over, but the trauma is eternal. The engineer of nightmares, Jigsaw's terrifying competence. What makes John Kramer so horrifying is his sheer competence. He's not a supernatural entity or an unstoppable force of nature. He's a engineer with cancer who happens to be frighteningly good at his job. His traps work with mechanical precision because he understands load-bearing weights, spring tensions, and structural weaknesses. His psychological manipulation succeeds because he studies his victims thoroughly, understanding their fears and weaknesses better than they understand themselves. This competence is terrifying because it's achievable. Jigsaw doesn't have supernatural powers or impossible resources. He has time, intelligence, and an absolute willingness to commit to his vision. He represents the horror of human potential, turned toward dark purposes, the terrible things that genius can accomplish when unmoored from empathy or ethical constraint. Moreover, he's a dying man, which adds urgency and pathos to his mission. He's racing against his own deteriorating body, trying to save as many people as possible before the cancer claims him. This creates a perverse nobility in his eyes, spending his final days trying to improve the world, even if his methods are monstrous. The dedication, the sacrifice of his remaining time, the physical agony he must endure while constructing his trap saw of this bestin in his twisted view, proves his sincerity. The cultural wound, why Saw resonated. Saw premiered in 2004, 3 years after September 11th, in a world grappling with new forms of anxiety and powerlessness. The film tapped into a cultural moment obsessed with control, security, and the fragility of safety. Its victims aren't stalked by a monster in the woods. They wake up already captured, already doomed unless they can solve an impossible puzzle. There's no running away, no calling for help. The trap has already sprung before they even know they're in danger. This reflected post-9/11's fears that danger could strike without warning, that security was illusory, that ordinary life could transform into nightmare in an instant. The film's torture-based horror also emerged during debates about enhanced interrogation techniques and the ethics of inflicting pain for supposedly greater purposes. Jigsaw's justifications that his torture serves a higher purpose, that it's for the victim's own good, comfortably echoed real-world rationalizations for state-sanctioned violence. But beyond these topical resonances, Saw touches something more primal, the fear that suffering is meaningless, that pain serves no purpose, that we might endure horrible things and learn nothing, gain nothing, remain unchanged except for the trauma. Jigsaw's philosophy, as deranged as it is, offers a perverse comfort: the idea that pain can be meaningful, that suffering can transform us, that there's a reason behind the agony. This is a lie, of course, but it's a seductive one, especially in a world that often feels random and cruel. The legacy of pain, Jigsaw's immortality. John Kramer died, but Jigsaw lives in sequels, certainly, but also in the cultural imagination. He represents a particular type of villain, the one who truly believes in his mission, who views himself as the hero of his own story. His moral code, however twisted, remains internally consistent. He follows his own rules, applies his own logic, never wavers in his conviction. This makes him far more disturbing than villains who kill for pleasure or profit. Those motivations we can understand, even if we condemn them. But Jigsaw's altruistic sadism, his therapeutic torture, his redemptive mutilation, these concepts are genuinely alien, fundamentally incomprehensible to most people. We cannot relate to someone who believes that forcing a woman to dig through a living man's intestines is an act of compassion, yet the franchise's enduring popularity suggests that something about this philosophy fascinates us. Perhaps it's the underlying question Jigsaw forces us to confront. Are we wasting our lives? Do we appreciate what we have? What would we sacrifice to survive? These questions linger long after the credits roll. Uncomfortable thoughts that surface during quiet moments. Conclusion: the teacher, the monster, the mirror. In the end, Jigsaw functions as a dark mirror, reflecting our own fears about wasted potential, meaningless existence, and the value we place on life. He's the voice in our heads that whispers we're not living fully, not appreciating enough, not making the most of our limited time. He's the manifestation of our harshest internal critic, armed with power tools and a terminal diagnosis. The art of pain, as Saw presents it, isn't about the blood or the gore, it's about the terrible question at the heart of the film. What is life worth? Jigsaw's answer is that life is worth exactly as much as we're willing to suffer to keep it. It's a nihilistic, brutal calculus, one that reduces human existence to mere survival instinct. But it's also an answer, a framework, a philosophy. However monstrous, we watch Jigsaw's games with horror, yes, but also with a terrible fascination. Because somewhere in our darkest thoughts, we wonder, would we pass his tests? Would we have the will to survive? Would we cut off our own foot, dig through human viscera, crawl through razor wire? Would we prove, in that final extremity, that we truly value the life we've been given? These questions have no comfortable answers, and that's why John Kramer, the man who became Jigsaw, remains one of horror's most enduring and disturbing villains, not because of the traps he builds, but because of the truths he forces us to confront about ourselves. Game over.